So if you think back to early 2025, some of the biggest, most data-driven companies in the world basically spent millions of dollars to just force everyone back into physical offices.
Yeah, they really did.
And, they cited collaboration, they cited culture, productivity, but what actually happened?
Yeah.
Because from what I remember, they essentially paid this massive premium to just lose, like, the top 30% of their best talent.
Right, while completely destroying the morale of everyone who stayed.
Exactly.
It was, frankly, a catastrophic miscalculation.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it wasn't just a handful of companies. This was a sweeping cross-industry movement.
Oh, for sure.
We saw these absolute giants, Amazon, JP Morgan Chase, Dell, and they suddenly reversed years of established flexibility policies.
Right.
They implemented these aggressive return-to-office mandates, which, we all just call RTO now, and the fallout was incredibly immediate.
Welcome to this deep dive, by the way. It's mid-2026 right now, and if you were in the workforce today, you are probably still feeling the whiplash from that whole era.
Oh, absolutely. The dust is just finally starting to settle.
Yeah. So today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating 2026 paper by Dr. Jonathan H. Westover. And the mission of our deep dive today is really explicit. We're going to look completely past the tired, honestly exhausted debate of remote versus in-office.
Thank goodness, right?
I know, right? We're way beyond arguing about which one is inherently better.
Exactly. That binary debate is just, it's no longer useful.
No, not at all.
Dr. Westover's paper is brilliant specifically because it focuses entirely on the how.
Right.
Given that these massive changes in work arrangements are just happening, how do organizations navigate these incredibly disruptive transitions without entirely destroying employee trust?
And completely tanking their bottom lines in the process.
Exactly.
So, okay, to really understand the damage that was done, I think we have to look at where we were right before the floor fell out. Set the scene for us a bit. What did the working world actually look like in early 2025 before these mandates hit everyone like a ton of bricks?
Well, the landscape had fundamentally shifted by then. By early 2025, the data showed that roughly 40% of full-time U.S. employees had built their entire lives around hybrid or virtual work.
Wow, 40%.
Yeah, and they were spending an average of 27% of their time working remotely.
Okay.
And I really want to emphasize that number. 27% might not sound like a full, remote takeover.
Right, it's just over a quarter of the time.
Exactly. But it represents a structural integration of flexibility into daily life. Like, this wasn't just a fringe perk anymore. It wasn't like casual Friday.
Yeah, casual Friday doesn't dictate where you live.
Right. It was the architectural blueprint of their existence.
Because, people don't just live in a vacuum. When you have that kind of flexibility for 3 or 4 years, you make massive, structural life decisions based on it.
Absolutely.
People arranged complex childcare schedules. They bought houses further out in the suburbs or, in entirely different states because they were told they only needed to commute once a month.
They adopted pets. They took in aging parents.
Yeah. They changed their entire life infrastructure based on the premise that this flexibility was just, the new normal.
Yeah.
So when these companies suddenly pulled the plug, it wasn't just an inconvenience about changing a commute.
No, not at all.
It felt like this profound betrayal, like a completely broken promise.
And that feeling of betrayal, that's exactly what leads us directly into the foundational concept of Dr. Westover's entire analysis.
Which is?
The psychological contract.
Ah, okay. Let's dig into that.
So if we look at psychological contract theory, and here we're referencing foundational work by Rousseau back in 1995, and later Tietz-Nadine in 2011, we see that employment is never just the formal piece of paper you signed on your first day.
Right, you mean the actual contract, like with your salary and your non-compete clause.
Exactly. That formal written contract is really just the skeleton. The psychological contract is the flesh and blood of the whole employment relationship. It is this vast, complex set of implicit, unwritten expectations and obligations between an employee and an employer.
So it's kind of like a mutual understanding.
Exactly. It's the understanding of, if I give you my absolute best effort and my loyalty, you will respect my autonomy and my well-being in return.
It's the underlying vibe of the deal, essentially. But it's a vibe that people take incredibly seriously.
Oh, very seriously.
Because, when you violate a written contract, you get a lawsuit. But when you violate a psychological contract, you get something that's almost worse for a business. on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
You get active disengagement. You get deep resentment.
Precisely. And what we experienced with the 2025 RTO mandates was this specific, highly volatile phenomenon that researchers call a restrictive work arrangement transition.
Okay, let's define that term. What actually makes a transition restrictive?
A restrictive transition is a fundamental decrease in an employee's flexibility and autonomy.
Okay.
It is the organization actively taking back control over the where and the when of work. It is the exact opposite of the expansive transitions we saw during the start of the pandemic, when organizations were suddenly pushing everyone outward and granting massive amounts of autonomy just to survive the crisis.
That difference is huge. And I think, honestly, it's where a lot of executives just completely misread the room.
I agree.
Because the pandemic shift back in 2020, that was an emergency. It was a crisis response. I remember that time so clearly.
We all do.
Everyone gave each other a massive amount of grace because the whole world was literally on fire. If the VPN didn't work or your kid was screaming in the background of a Zoom call, management completely understood.
Right, everyone was in the same boat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But these 2025 mandates, these were completely voluntary.
Yeah.
These were unilateral organizational decisions made in comfortable boardrooms, completely outside of any external global crisis.
That is the critical distinction right there. The 2025 mandates were not born of necessity. They were born of preference.
Right.
And they were implemented after employees had spent several years proving conclusively that remote work actually functioned.
Yeah, that's the kicker.
Employees had kept the economy afloat, they hit their targets, they maintained productivity, all while working from their kitchen tables.
I actually have an analogy for how this feels on the ground for the average worker.
I'd love to hear it.
Imagine you're handed a massive promotion. You get the new title, you get the corner office, the better pay,
Right.
and you do the job incredibly well for 3 years.
Okay.
You hit every single metric, you drive revenue, you prove beyond a shadow of a doubt you're perfect for the role.
Right.
And then, one random Tuesday, the boss just walks in and says, actually, we're taking the title and the office back, and you're going back to your old salary, but, we still expect you to deliver the exact same high-level results you've been delivering for the past 3 years.
Wow. Yeah.
Naturally, you would feel incredibly betrayed.
That is a highly accurate comparison, honestly, because in both of those scenarios, the employee has already demonstrated their competence in a new, elevated state of autonomy.
Right, they prove themselves.
Exactly. And when that autonomy is just revoked without any performance-based justification, when it's just a blanket policy change out of nowhere, the employee interprets it as a deeply personal devaluation.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate here for a second, because I know for a fact there are executives listening to this who are mentally screaming at their speakers right now.
Oh, sure are.
Didn't companies have a right to bring people back? I mean, structurally speaking, it's their office building. It's their payroll. They are the ones signing the checks and taking on all the financial risk of the business.
Right.
So don't they have the fundamental right to dictate where the work they are paying for actually happens?
So that is the exact argument that dominated boardrooms in late 2024. And the short answer is, legally and structurally, yes, they absolutely have the right. An employer can generally set the terms of employment. However, Dr. Westover's analysis points out a very crucial management reality.
Which is?
Simply having the right to do something doesn't mean doing it abruptly is effective or even profitable.
Ah, okay.
And this is where we have to introduce a concept called procedural justice.
Procedural justice.
Okay.
Let's break that down, because it sounds like legal jargon, but I know it's an incredibly important concept in workplace psychology.
It is. Procedural justice is exactly what it sounds like. It's the perceived fairness of the process that is used to make a decision, regardless of the actual outcome.
Oh, could you give me an example?
Think about getting a speeding ticket. If the police officer is polite, if they explain clearly why you were pulled over and they treat you with respect, you might be annoyed about the fine, obviously.
Sure, nobody likes a ticket.
Right, but you generally accept it. That's high procedural justice. But if the officer is rude, refuses to answer your questions, and just aggressively throws the ticket at you.
Oh, you are furious.
Exactly. You are absolutely furious, even if the fine is the exact same amount.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So how does that directly apply to the RTO mandates?
When organizations exercise their authority in a way that violates procedural justice, meaning the process feels unfair or arbitrary, or it completely ignores the employee's voice, they spark a very specific kind of organizational resistance.
Right.
Dr. Westover notes that many of these mandates were rolled out abruptly, with zero consultation, usually via just a mass email from a CEO on a Friday afternoon.
The classic Friday news dump.
Exactly. You might win the short-term battle of getting bodies into seats on a Monday morning, but you entirely lose the long-term war of organizational commitment.
Okay, so if these organizations, which let's remember are packed with highly paid consultants, massive HR departments, top-tier data analysts, if they knew that this abrupt method was going to cause anger, break the psychological contract, and violate procedural justice, why did they do it?
That's the big question.
Right. Why push so hard for a strict 5-day RTO? What was the actual goal here? Because it really feels like there is a huge, glaring disconnect between the reasons they stated in their press releases and what was actually happening behind closed doors.
To understand the true motivations, we have to split them into two distinct categories: the stated public drivers and the hidden shadow drivers.
Okay, let's look at the public ones first.
Publicly, the messaging was remarkably consistent across almost every industry. Organizations cited collaboration quality, innovation capacity, and cultural maintenance.
Right.
They essentially argued that spontaneous water cooler interactions were absolutely essential for maintaining company culture and for the cross-pollination of new ideas.
Ah, yes, the magical water cooler where all multi-million-dollar corporate strategies are supposedly born.
Right.
I've always found that narrative a bit romanticized, honestly. I don't know about you, but most of my water cooler conversations are about television shows or complaining about the weather. They're not usually about inventing a brand new product line.
Yeah.
But they also talked heavily about real estate, didn't they?
They did. And the real estate argument is rooted in very concrete financial anxiety.
How so?
Well, many of these corporations have massive, incredibly expensive headquarters, and they are often locked into 10, 15, or even 20-year commercial leases.
Oh, wow, 20 years.
Yeah. So when you have a billion-dollar campus sitting essentially empty, the board of directors starts asking very uncomfortable questions about capital allocation.
Basically, why are we paying for this empty building?
Precisely. There was a tremendous internal pressure to justify those sunk costs by filling the buildings with bodies.
Okay, so that's the public face of it.
Yeah.
We need collaboration, and hey, we have this beautiful building we're already paying for. But Dr. Westover's paper dives into the shadow drivers, which is where it gets really interesting.
Yes, it does.
What were the hidden reasons driving these aggressive mandates?
The shadow drivers are where the true, often very messy dynamics of corporate leadership really reveal themselves. And one of the most significant hidden drivers was a strong desire for voluntary attrition.
Meaning stealth layoffs.
Exactly, stealth layoffs.
Huh.
If an executive team knows they need to reduce headcount by, say, 10% to appease shareholders, they essentially have two options.
Right.
Option A is a formal layoff. But that requires paying out millions of dollars in severance packages. It means dealing with a terrible PR cycle, and it means formally admitting to the market that the company might be struggling.
Well, nobody wants to do.
Exactly. So option B is mandating a strict, inflexible return to the office, knowing full well that a certain percentage of the workforce will simply refuse and quit.
It's a way to shrink the payroll without taking any of the blame. You just say, well, they chose to leave because they didn't want to comply with our cultural standards. It's incredibly cynical.
It is highly cynical. But from a purely short-term financial perspective, it was viewed as highly efficient by certain executive boards. Another major shadow driver was middle manager anxiety.
Oh, this is a big one.
We really have to look at the psychology of a traditional middle manager here. In a highly distributed, remote team, a manager's relevance is based entirely on facilitating outcomes and clearing roadblocks for their team.
Right.
But historically, many managers were trained to manage by walking around, by visually observing activity.
The visual surveillance crutch. Like, I see you typing at your desk, therefore I know you're working, therefore I feel like I am successfully managing you.
Precisely. Remote work completely removed that visual crutch.
All right.
Suddenly, evaluating performance required actually measuring complex outputs.
Which is difficult to do.
Very difficult. Many middle managers felt entirely obsolete and lost in a remote environment. So they exerted immense upward pressure on senior leadership to bring people back simply so they could feel in control again.
That makes total sense, sad as it is.
Yeah.
Were there any other shadow drivers?
Yes, finally, there was the shadow driver of senior leadership's own nostalgic preference.
Is that sort of a "I suffered, so you must suffer" mentality? Or more like, "This is how I became successful, so it must be the only way to be successful"?
Definitely the latter. Many executives built their highly successful careers in traditional, high-visibility, hyper-competitive office environments.
Right, pressing flesh, shaking hands.
Exactly. They built networks in hallways and closed massive deals over in-person lunches. It is very difficult for human beings to separate the specific environment of their success from the concept of success itself.
They just preferred the traditional model because it worked for them.
Yes, they simply preferred it, and they had the raw power to enforce it.
But here is the fatal disconnect with all of this. If a company issues a memo saying, "We need you all back in the office next month because we value our unique culture and want to foster innovation,"
Right.
but every single employee on the ground suspects it's actually a stealth layoff to avoid paying severance, profound cynicism just takes root. There's a 2026 study by Cascio, cited in Dr. Westover's paper, that specifically highlights this dynamic. When the stated reason directly contradicts the suspected reality, it breeds an incredibly toxic work environment.
And that toxicity isn't just an HR problem, It has a measurable, devastating financial cost. This is the great irony of the 2025 mandates.
What happened?
Well, organizations thought that RTO would save money, maybe by inducing a few stealth layoffs, consolidating some remote software licenses, or cutting work-from-home stipends. But the net costs actually skyrocketed.
Let's look at those turnover numbers, because when I read this part of the paper, it completely blew my mind. We aren't just talking about a minor bump in resignations here.
No, we are talking about a mass exodus. Organizations that enforced a strict, inflexible RTO saw a 15% to 30% increase in turnover within a single year.
Up to a third of the workforce.
Yes.
And the worst part for these companies is the actual demographic of who is leaving. When you implement a stealth layoff via a bad policy, you don't get to choose who walks out the door.
No, you don't.
The paper makes it explicitly clear. The people you lose aren't your low performers who are barely hanging on. You lose your high performers.
That is the fundamental flaw of the stealth layoff strategy. High performers, by definition, possess strong external labor market options.
Right.
Their resumes are stellar, their networks are deep, and recruiters are constantly in their inboxes. They do not have to tolerate a broken psychological contract.
I can just walk away.
Exactly. When you mandate an unfavorable policy, the people with options exercise those options and leave. The low performers, who might really struggle to find another job in a tight market, are the ones who comply and stay.
So you actively drain the talent pool of your most productive, innovative people, leaving you with a workforce that is less capable and incredibly resentful.
Yes.
And the recruitment challenges to try and replace those high performers must have been just a nightmare.
The recruitment premium became exorbitant. The paper cites data showing that job seekers value flexibility so highly that they will actively turn down a 10% to 15% salary increase just to maintain hybrid or remote options.
Wow. Turning down 15% just to stay home a few days a week.
Exactly. So if you are a company forcing 5 days in the office, you are fighting a two-front war.
Thus so.
You are either forced to settle for a much lower quality talent pool because the best candidates won't even apply, or you have to pay a massive unsustainable salary premium just to convince someone to sit in your physical building.
Let me stop you there and push back on the bottom line argument for a second.
Sure.
Okay, so I'm a CEO, I'm losing some people, and I'm having to pay a 15% premium to recruit new talent. I'm eating all these turnover costs.
Right.
But surely, if everyone is back in the building, I'm getting more widgets made, more code written, more deals closed. Doesn't that extra time in the office at least guarantee a massive spike in productivity that somehow offsets those costs?
What's fascinating here is what the data actually shows. It completely contradicts that assumption.
Really?
Yes. The paper references a brilliant, highly rigorous field experiment conducted by Choudhury and colleagues in 2026, and they actually measured this systematically.
Okay.
They didn't just ask people how they felt on a survey. They tracked hard output metrics, code commits, deal flow, project completion rates across different work arrangements.
Okay, what were the exact setups they compared in the study?
They compared a moderate hybrid model, specifically 2 days in the office and 3 days remote, against a strict 5-day office mandate.
Then the results.
What they found was that the 2-day hybrid model yielded the exact same productivity as the 5-day mandate.
Wait, the exact same, not like slightly less.
Exact same productivity metrics. The volume and the quality of the output were statistically indistinguishable.
That is wild.
However, and this is the crucial part, the hybrid model maintains significantly higher employee satisfaction and retention.
Why is that, though? Why doesn't being in the office for days 3, 4, and 5 add any tangible value?
Because of the nature of modern knowledge work, pushing from 2 or 3 days in the office to a full 5 days showed severely diminishing returns.
Okay.
The extra office time produced a slight uptick in the frequency of casual collaboration, like people chatting in the hallways, but it completely failed to translate into actual performance improvements. It was activity for the sake of activity.
Oh, wow.
Furthermore, days 3, 4, and 5 in an open-plan office often lead to increased interruptions, cognitive fatigue, and performative presenteeism.
Performative presenteeism, meaning looking busy.
Right, where people are just trying to look busy for the boss rather than actually doing deep, focused work.
So on a macro level, we are seeing massive corporate bleeding, huge turnover of top talent, enormous recruitment costs to replace them, completely stagnant productivity, and deep organizational cynicism.
It's a bleak picture.
It really is.
Yeah.
But I want to zoom in now. We've talked about the 15 to 30% who quit. Let's talk about the human toll on the individuals who actually stayed.
Yes, that's crucial.
Because for the people actually living through this transition on the ground, it wasn't just some abstract corporate strategy. It was a deeply personal, daily disruption.
It was incredibly personal, and the multidimensional consequences on individual lives were severe. Dr. Westover's paper outlines 3 main areas of impact: intense work-life conflict, perceived injustice, and serious career derailment.
I want to focus heavily on the injustice aspect of that, specifically what the paper calls distributive justice.
Okay.
We defined procedural justice earlier as the fairness of the process.
Yeah.
How is distributive justice different, and how did it play out here?
Distributive justice is the perceived fairness of how resources, rewards, and burdens are actually distributed among a group of people.
Right.
If an organization has to make a sacrifice, do all employees bear that burden equally, or does it disproportionately fall on a specific demographic?
Think of it like a sinking ship. If there are only enough lifeboats for half the passengers, the process of how you choose who gets a seat is procedural justice.
Exactly.
But if the final outcome is that only the first-class passengers get lifeboats, while the crew is left behind to sink, the distribution of that burden is fundamentally unjust.
That is a perfect analogy, and these RTO mandates did not distribute the burden equally.
Right.
If you are a 25-year-old single person living in a downtown apartment, a 10-minute walk from headquarters, going back to the office might actually be a positive experience.
Yeah, you get free snacks, you socialize with your friends, your home utility bills go down. The burden on you is minimal.
Exactly, but consider the parents.
Yeah.
Consider the employees who are primary caregivers for elderly or disabled family members.
This is where the real pain of the transition happened, I think.
Unquestionably.
During the remote work era, many employees were finally able to balance profound caregiving responsibilities with full-time careers. Specifically because they had the autonomy to manage their own time. Parents could do the school drop-off, work intensely for 4 hours, pick up their kids, and then log back on in the evening to finish their tasks.
People caring for aging parents could be physically present in the home while still hitting their professional deadlines.
So when the inflexible mandates hit, that delicate, carefully constructed balance was just utterly shattered.
Completely. The distributive justice issue arises because the policy completely ignores the reality that time and location flexibility are significantly more valuable to certain demographics than others.
And we also had to consider the employees who relocated, right?
Yeah, yes. During the pandemic, many workers moved to more affordable areas, often hours away from urban centers.
And frequently with the explicit or implicit blessing of their direct managers.
Exactly. Suddenly, they were faced with impossible supercommutes, or they were forced into highly disruptive relocations back to the city just to keep their jobs.
And even for the people who managed to negotiate keeping some of their flexibility, like, let's say a working mother managed to get a formal exception from HR to stay remote 3 days a week.
Right.
They faced a whole different kind of punishment. The paper calls it the flexibility stigma. This concept completely blew me away.
The flexibility stigma is insidious. Dr. Westover cites research by Williams and colleagues going back to 2013, which shows this isn't even a new phenomenon, but it has become hyper-relevant today.
What exactly is it?
The flexibility stigma is a well-documented bias where employees who utilize flexible work arrangements, especially remote work, are actively penalized in performance reviews, promotion decisions, and salary increases.
Just because they aren't physically there.
Purely due to a lack of physical visibility, yes.
Even if their actual output is identical or even superior to their peers who are sitting in the office every day.
Yes. It means that even if the organization formally permits remote work through an HR exception, the underlying culture still penalizes it.
That is wild.
It's rooted in the evolutionary psychology of human perception. Our brains are hardwired to equate physical presence and visible effort with dedication and loyalty.
So if a manager sees an employee sitting at their desk at 7:00 p.m., the manager's brain registers that as hard work, even if the employee is just like online shopping.
Exactly. And if a remote worker finishes all their tasks brilliantly by 3:00 p.m. and logs off, the manager's brain registers that as slacking.
So staying home means you quietly fall behind in your career, but going into the office means you take a massive hit to your wallet and your time.
It's a catch-22.
Let's do the math on the actual financial impact of returning to the office, because it is staggering.
The paper provides a very sobering calculation on this. When you factor in all the associated costs, returning to the office is an immense financial burden.
Let's break it down meticulously for people.
Sure. First, you have the commute. Gas prices, tolls, and the accelerated depreciation and maintenance on a vehicle.
Right. Then you have the return of the professional wardrobe. You can't just wear sweatpants and a nice top on a Zoom call anymore.
No, you cannot. You are buying dry clean only slacks, blazers, dress shoes, and paying to maintain them.
Then there is the lunch tax.
Oh, the lunch tax. The reality that when you are rushing to the office, you are much more likely to buy a $15 salad or a $5 coffee than you are to meticulously meal prep at home.
Exactly. And finally, the most massive cost for many, reinstating preschool and after-school childcare to cover the commute time and the strict office hours.
Yes. And when the paper tallies all of this up, the financial impact averages between $5,000 and $10,000 annually per employee.
And we need to emphasize something very important here. That is post-tax money.
That is a critical point. To put $5,000 to $10,000 of disposable income back in your pocket to cover those costs, you need to earn roughly $7,000 to $13,000 more in gross salary, depending on your tax bracket.
So for many of the people listening right now, a mandatory office return wasn't just an inconvenience or a fun change of scenery. It was an effective unilateral pay cut of $10,000 a year.
Yes, it was.
And that's just the financial cost. We haven't even talked about the time tax.
Yeah.
Let's look at a standard commute. Say it takes you 45 minutes each way. That's 90 minutes a day.
Which is 4.5 hours a week, 18 hours a month.
You're essentially taking on a part-time job that consists entirely of sitting in traffic, unpaid.
Completely unpaid.
You lose almost an entire work week's worth of hours every single month. When you calculate it out like that, it perfectly explains why this triggers such deep, visceral anger and distributive justice concerns.
Right.
It feels profoundly unfair to have that time and money just seized from you without any negotiation.
And that feeling of unfairness is magnified tenfold when employees witness executive hypocrisy.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
The psychological contract isn't just broken, it is incinerated when employees see senior leaders exempting themselves from the very policies they force on subordinates.
Oh, absolutely. When the CEO sends out an email mandating a return to the office for the culture, but they hit send from their summer home in the Hamptons, while mandating that the rank and file spend 90 minutes on a crowded subway every day, the workforce doesn't just get annoyed. They become actively hostile.
Because it proves that the mandate isn't about business outcomes at all, it's about control.
Yeah.
It signals that flexibility is a luxury reserved for the elite, while physical attendance is a mere compliance metric for the workers.
Okay, so the picture we've painted up to this point is incredibly bleak.
Very bleak.
We're looking at a landscape of burned bridges, lost money, exhausted people, and plummeting retention. But I want to pivot here.
Good idea.
Because the true value of Dr. Westover's paper isn't just that it's a critique of what went wrong. It is actually a highly detailed, evidence-based playbook.
Yes, it provides solutions.
The reality is that restrictive transitions, as painful as they are sometimes necessary. A company might genuinely need to change its operating model to survive a market shift.
Right.
So if an organization absolutely has to restrict flexibility, how do the smart ones pull it off without burning the entire building down?
The paper identifies 5 specific evidence-based strategic interventions that successful organizations use to manage these transitions effectively.
Okay, what are the first two?
Let's start with the first two: transparent communication and procedural justice, and capability building for dual-mode operations.
Let's unpack the communication piece first. Because when most corporate leaders hear transparent communication, they think that means sending a really long, polite email on a Friday afternoon explaining the new policy.
They do, but the paper is talking about something much deeper than a memo. It brings us right back to that concept of procedural justice.
Exactly. A memo is not procedural justice.
No, it's not. Remember our speeding ticket analogy. Procedural justice requires the process to be perceived as fair, unbiased, and inclusive of the employee's voice.
Right.
If employees feel genuinely heard and if they feel the decision-making process is transparent, they will often accept unfavorable outcomes.
Okay.
Dr. Westover highlights that best-in-class organizations didn't just announce a mandate for the following month. They gave their employees massive runways.
Runways.
Yes, like 6 to 12 months of notice before the policy took full effect.
Wow. A 6-month runway gives people actual time to restructure their lives. It gives them time to find new childcare or, honestly, to find a new job if the policy is a complete deal breaker for them.
Exactly. It treats them like adults. It demonstrates respect for the employee's life outside of work.
That's huge.
Furthermore, these organizations created structured, formal mechanisms for employee voice before the policy was ever finalized.
Okay, the paper brings up J.P. Morgan Chase in 2024 as a case study for this. And they handled their transition in a really fascinating way.
They did.
They knew they wanted people back in the office more frequently, but instead of just dropping the hammer unilaterally, they hosted extensive, structured listening sessions.
Right.
And they didn't just hold general town halls where everyone complains at once. They specifically targeted parent and caregiver resource groups.
And how a structured listening session is facilitated is crucial. It's not just executives sitting on a stage taking angry questions.
What does it look like then?
It involves bringing in neutral facilitators, establishing clear objectives for the session, and explicitly stating how the feedback will be used.
Right.
J.P. Morgan Chase actively listened to the pain points regarding commute times and childcare hours. And crucially, they adjusted their implementation timelines based directly on what they heard.
They demonstrated that the feedback actually mattered. It wasn't just theater.
Exactly. But the most important thing they did, in my opinion, was how they handled the exceptions process. Because no matter what policy you create, there will always be edge cases.
Right. The exception process is the true test of procedural justice, isn't it?
Yeah.
Unclear, hidden, or arbitrary exceptions just generate massive resentment.
Think about it. If one department manager is lenient and lets their favorite employee work from home on Fridays, but the manager in the next department strictly enforces a 5-day attendance rule for the exact same role, the entire system feels rigged.
It breeds paranoia. People start wondering who's getting special treatment and why.
Exactly. J.P. Morgan Chase tackled this by heavily training their managers on how to apply the rules consistently.
Oh, so?
They established clear, documented, organization-wide criteria for what constituted a valid accommodation, and they made that criteria public. The process was standardized, not based on which manager you happen to report to.
Let me jump in and play devil's advocate again.
Go for it.
I can hear a stressed-out executive saying, is all this really necessary? 6 months of notice, targeted listening sessions, standardized exception matrices. This sounds exhausting and incredibly slow. Can't a company just say, look, we pay your salary, the policy is October 1st, be here and let the chips fall where they may. If people leave, we'll just hire new people.
A company can absolutely choose that path. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, they have to be prepared to accept the severe consequences we discussed earlier.
Right, the bleeding.
They must be prepared to lose 30% of their top talent, pay a 15% premium to replace them, and watch their innovation metrics plummet.
Which is incredibly expensive.
You invest the time and resources into procedural justice because it is vastly, exponentially cheaper than replacing a third of your workforce. It is a fundamental risk mitigation strategy.
That makes perfect sense.
And that leads directly into the second intervention, capability building.
Right. Because communication only gets you so far. You can't just throw people back into an office or into some weird hybrid model and expect it to work like it did in 2019.
Absolutely not. The tools have changed, the expectations have changed.
Managing a hybrid team requires a completely different set of skills than managing a fully in-office team or a fully remote team. Without training, that proximity bias, the flexibility stigma we talked about, just ruins morale.
That's entirely correct. Most legacy managers are highly skilled at leading co-located teams.
Sure, because that's what they've done for 20 years.
Exactly. They know how to read the physical room, they know how to manage by walking around, they know how to gauge consensus through eye contact. But managing a team where 2 people are sitting in a conference room with you and 3 people are floating heads on a screen, that requires a distinct learned capability.
And Microsoft is a fantastic example of a company that recognized this gap, right?
Yes. Between 2021 and 2023, Microsoft didn't just roll out a hybrid schedule. They created this comprehensive, highly detailed hybrid work guide for their managers.
They recognized that you cannot mandate a new operational model without providing the actual operational manual.
What I found particularly fascinating about Microsoft's approach was their intense focus on something called hybrid meeting equality.
Let's walk through what a hybrid meeting actually feels like for a second, because this is where so much friction happens in corporate America.
Yes.
If you've ever been the one person on a screen while everyone else is sitting around a big mahogany table in a conference room, eating bagels and having side conversations, you know exactly how marginalizing it is.
It's terrible.
You try to speak, but there is a half-second audio delay. Someone in the room talks over you. The camera is positioned at the far end of the table, so you can't see anyone's facial expressions. It's awful.
It is a fundamentally unbalanced power dynamic. Microsoft trained their managers to proactively dismantle that dynamic.
How did they do it?
They instituted standards so that virtual participants were never treated as second-class citizens. For instance, they mandated default virtual attendance protocols.
What does that mean?
Even if a few participants were co-located in the same building, they required everyone to log in individually from their own laptops.
Oh, so everyone has an equal-sized box on the screen, regardless of where they are physically sitting.
Exactly.
That instantly levels the visual playing field.
It does. They also required structured turn-taking in meetings, meaning the facilitator was explicitly accountable for stopping the physical room and directly asking the remote workers for input.
I love that.
They recognize that without deliberate structural intervention, organizations will automatically default to practices that are optimized for whoever is physically present.
Okay, so fixing communication, ensuring procedural justice, and training managers how to run a hybrid meeting, that's a great start. It puts a tourniquet on the immediate bleeding.
Right.
But if the underlying corporate systems, the core mechanics of how you get promoted, how you get paid, and the physical tools you use are still biased toward whoever's sitting in the conference room, all that manager training is essentially just a Band-Aid on a bullet wound.
That's very true.
You have to go deeper into the infrastructure.
You do. And that transitions us to the next 3 systemic interventions in Dr. Westover's playbook: redesign performance management, technology infrastructure optimization, and financial support.
Okay, let's look at performance management first, because it is the bedrock of the psychological contract.
The research by Golden and Ford in 2025 emphasizes the absolute necessity of shifting away from activity-based observation to strictly outcome-based evaluation frameworks.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me, because using an old performance review system for hybrid work is like trying to referee a basketball game by only looking at the player's shoes.
Okay, I like this.
You might be watching them run around very fast, but you are measuring the completely wrong metric. You are tracking their physical location and their visible effort, instead of looking up to see if the ball actually went through the hoop.
That is a brilliant analogy.
You have to upgrade the whole operating system to track the ball.
Exactly. You cannot attach a new, flexible work arrangement to an obsolete, visibility-based evaluation framework. If you do, the flexibility stigma will always win.
Right.
Organizations have to define incredibly clear goal-setting mechanisms and measurable success criteria that function identically regardless of where the employee is physically sitting.
And Salesforce did this brilliantly with their success from anywhere model, right?
They really did. The Salesforce case study was incredible. To shift focus entirely to the ball going through the hoop, they adopted OKR's objectives and key results across the board.
Meaning every single role had distinct measurable outcomes.
Right. But wait, measuring outcomes is one thing. The wildest part of the Salesforce strategy was how they handled their promotion process to actually eliminate bias.
Oh, this part is amazing.
This is where they truly tackled the flexibility stigma at a systemic level. When their promotion committees convened to review candidates for advancement, the candidate's primary work location was explicitly scrubbed out of the HR file until the very final stages of the decision.
Yeah, how do you actually do that in practice, though? If a manager is on the committee, don't they know who comes into the office and who doesn't?
Well, in a massive matrixed organization like Salesforce, promotion committees often include cross-functional leaders who do not interact with the candidate on a daily basis.
Ah, okay.
So by utilizing HR software that explicitly blinds the candidate's location data, similar to how symphony orchestras conduct blind auditions behind a screen to prevent gender bias, they force the committee to evaluate the work itself.
They evaluated the OKRs, the
Yeah.
revenue generated, the code deployed.
They literally blinded the committee to prevent location bias.
It explicitly neutralizes the stigma by making it mechanically impossible to judge someone based on their physical presence.
Yeah.
That is incredibly smart.
It really is. Now, alongside evaluating performance systems, organizations have to evaluate their physical environment. The fourth intervention is technology infrastructure and work environment optimization.
Right. The paper stresses that companies need to stop viewing remote technology as a deficit or a lesser version of work, and they need to fundamentally change what the physical office is actually for.
Yes. The office needs a completely new value proposition.
Because honestly, the physical office shouldn't just be a place you endure a stressful 90-minute commute for, just so you can sit at a desk, put on noise-canceling headphones, and send emails in absolute silence for 8 hours.
Exactly.
If I can do focused individual work at home, why am I dragging my laptop on a train just to do it in a different chair? The paper suggests the office needs to become a studio.
A studio for collaboration, yes. Dropbox is the prime example of this optimization.
What did they do?
They adopted what they called a virtual first model, but they didn't just abandon their real estate. They completely redesigned their physical offices. They removed rows of individual cubicles and turned the spaces into literal studios environments, specifically optimized for collaborative workshops, team building exercises, and major client meetings.
So you don't go to the Dropbox office to write a solo report. You go there for specific, highly interactive purposes that actually benefit from physical proximity.
Exactly. It fundamentally changes the psychology of the commute. When an employee travels to a studio, the commute feels justified and valuable because they're going to do something they cannot easily do at home.
Right.
If they are just commuting to do isolated screen work, the commute feels punitive. The office transitions from being a panopticon for managerial monitoring into a specialized tool for specific tasks.
And speaking of the commute, that brings us to the fifth and final immediate intervention: financial support and transition assistance. We mapped out earlier how an RTO mandate can cost an employee up to $10,000 a year in post-tax money. If a company is going to force a transition that heavily burdens the employee financially, Dr. Westover argues that the company needs to help shoulder that burden.
Precisely. If an organization genuinely acknowledges the financial reality of their policy change, they can significantly mitigate the psychological contract breach by offering tangible support.
Right.
Spotify provides a phenomenal case study in this kind of empathy.
What does Spotify do?
When Spotify needed to adjust their policies to require more periodic physical office presence for certain teams, they didn't just demand compliance and leave employees to figure out the logistics themselves.
Right.
They offered robust relocation assistance for employees who had moved away during the pandemic. They extended childcare subsidies to help bridge the gap for parents who suddenly had to cover commute times. They even provided professional transition coaching.
Again, I can hear the CFOs out there balking at the immediate cost of that. We have to pay for their childcare and hire them moving trucks just to get them to come to work.
Right. It sounds expensive up front.
But let's go back to the math. We established that replacing a top performer costs a fortune, often 50 to 100% of their annual salary in recruitment, onboarding, and lost productivity.
Exactly. Giving an employee a one-time relocation bonus of $5,000 or offering a few months of commute subsidies is infinitely cheaper than replacing them.
The ROI is just obvious.
The return on investment for basic financial empathy is massive. It is entirely a strategy for retention. When you provide transition support, you are sending a clear, undeniable signal to your workforce. We value you, we recognize that this policy change is highly disruptive to your life, and we are financially partnering with you to make it work.
That action preserves the psychological contract, even during a restrictive transition.
Yes, it does.
Okay, so let's summarize these 5 interventions for the listener. We have transparent communication with a long runway, capability building for managers to handle hybrid friction, outcome-based performance metrics that blind location bias, transforming the office into a collaborative studio, and providing financial transition support.
That's the playbook.
Implementing these 5 steps is a fantastic way to survive the immediate shock of the transition. It stops the corporate bleeding. But how do companies stop playing policy ping pong?
What do you mean by policy ping pong?
I mean, this constant oscillation. Like first it's 5 days in the office, then a pandemic sends everyone home, then it's 2 days a week, then a new CEO comes in and mandates 4 days. How do organizations stop merely reacting to crises and actually prepare for the next decade of work? Because work and the technology that drives it is not going to stop evolving.
That is the ultimate goal, and it forms the final visionary section of Dr. Westover's paper, Future-Proofing Work. Surviving the RTO wave is not enough. Organizations need to build long-term, resilient capabilities. The paper outlines 3 pillars for sustainable work arrangement management. The first is psychological contract recalibration.
Recalibration. So we are sitting down and actively fixing the invisible ink of that unwritten agreement we talked about at the start.
Exactly. Organizations and employees need to stop operating on assumptions and explicitly redefine the terms of engagement.
Right.
During the heights of the pandemic, many employees naturally started viewing absolute flexibility as a permanent baseline entitlement. Conversely, many organizations viewed it as a temporary, revocable privilege.
Neither of those extreme viewpoints is sustainable for a long-term business relationship.
No, they aren't.
So how do you recalibrate it? How do you get both sides on the exact same page?
The paper suggests establishing clear, shared expectations through formal annual work arrangement discussions.
Yep.
Just as you have an annual performance review, you have an annual arrangement review.
Walk me through what that actually looks like in practice.
Instead of relying on a sweeping, one-size-fits-all policy dictated by the CEO, an employee and their direct manager sit down once a year. They review the business goals for the upcoming year.
Okay.
They say, okay, here are the major projects you are leading. Here are the teams you need to interface with. Based on these specific upcoming tasks, what does your work arrangement need to look like to optimize your output?
It moves flexibility from being an informal, nebulous perk to a strategic tool that is actively logically managed.
Exactly.
I love that. It makes the implicit entirely explicit. It clarifies the exact conditions under which flexibility might need to be adjusted.
Right.
So if a major project requires intense co-located collaboration for a month, the employee knows in advance that their arrangement will temporarily shift. When the change happens, it doesn't feel arbitrary or punitive because it was planned for.
Exactly. It removes the surprise, which removes the sense of betrayal. And the second pillar builds directly on this localized approach, distributed leadership.
Yes, getting the decision-making out of the C-suite bottleneck. I have spoken to so many people who find this incredibly frustrating.
It's very common.
Imagine a data analyst who spends 90% of their week writing complex SQL queries in total isolation. They put in a perfectly logical request to work from home 3 days a week.
Yeah.
But it gets denied because some disconnected executive, 3 levels up in the hierarchy, set a blanket no work from home rule for the entire division.
That is centralized decision-making, and it is fatal to nuance. Distributed leadership means empowering local mid-level managers to decide their own team's schedules based on actual task interdependencies.
Because different teams do fundamentally different work.
Precisely. A high-velocity sales team that needs to coordinate closely, shadow calls, and feed off each other's energy might collectively choose a different cadence, maybe 4 days in the office, than a software engineering team that requires long stretches of uninterrupted deep work and only needs to meet once a week for a sprint review. Under distributed leadership, the organization sets the broad guardrails, the core principles of equity, security, and performance metrics. But the local managers make the actual operational decisions.
I want to direct this right to the listener for a second. Think about your own workplace right now. Think about the leadership team above you. Are they treating work arrangements as a static, one-and-done rule book?
It's a great question to ask.
Are they acting like it's 2019 and the rules of where work happens are set in stone? Or are they treating it as a living, breathing experiment? Because if they aren't treating it as an ongoing experiment, they're going to get left behind by the market.
That framing leads us perfectly into the final pillar, continuous learning systems. As Zorin and Lemovsek point out in their 2026 research, the nature of work is going to keep evolving at an accelerating rate.
Just look at the explosion of artificial intelligence over the last few years.
Exactly. AI is fundamentally changing task structures, eliminating rote work, and elevating the need for complex, creative problem solving.
Right.
New augmented reality collaboration technologies are emerging that will make remote presence feel incredibly visceral. And employee demographics are shifting as Gen Z becomes a dominant force in the labor market.
For sure.
Organizations that just stubbornly optimize for one specific configuration, whether that's rigidly fully remote or rigidly fully in office, will always find themselves flat-footed, reacting to the next crisis.
So they need rapid response capabilities. They need to run pilot programs. Instead of waiting for an annual crisis or the devastating wave of resignations, to suddenly realize a rigid policy isn't working, they should be constantly testing smaller hypotheses.
Exactly.
Like, let's try this specific hybrid schedule with the marketing team for 2 months, track the engagement and output metrics, and adjust based on the data. It completely removes the executive ego from the policy.
It creates an agile organization. An organization built on continuous learning is resilient to disruption.
Right.
When the next major shift happens, and they won't be traumatized by it, they will simply adapt their existing flexible frameworks to accommodate it.
Okay, let's synthesize this massive journey we've been on today. We started by looking at the wreckage of early 2025. We saw how those abrupt unilateral RTO mandates completely shattered the psychological contracts between employers and employees.
We did.
We pulled back the curtain on the hidden drivers, the stealth layoffs designed to avoid severance, the anxiety of middle managers desperate for visual control, and the nostalgia of executives projecting their own past success onto a new era.
And we examined the severe human toll that those drivers caused.
Yeah.
We looked at the profound distributive injustice inflicted on caregivers and those who relocated. We unpacked the insidious nature of the flexibility stigma, and we walked through the literal thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours it costs individuals to comply with these inflexible mandates.
But most importantly, we didn't just dwell on the negative. We walked through the rigorous evidence-based playbook for how the smartest companies in the world are actually managing these transitions.
It's not magic. It's deliberate, empathetic management.
Right. It requires transparent communication with long runways, a systemic redesign of performance metrics to focus on outcomes over presence, providing financial empathy to ease the burden, and transforming the physical office into a collaborative tool rather than a tracking device.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I really want to leave the listener with one final unmentioned angle to ponder.
Oh, what's that?
Consider the generation of workers entering the professional workforce right now. This is a cohort whose entire higher education experience and their early formative career years happened completely post-2020.
Wow. Yes, they have a completely different baseline.
They do. They have never known a corporate world where physical presence in a cubicle was considered the sole unquestioned metric of productivity.
Right.
They've grown up natively collaborating across digital ecosystems. As this generation rapidly ascends into middle and senior management over the next decade, will they view this entire return-to-office struggle, the mandates, the tracking badges, the debates over water cooler culture, as an antiquated, bizarre relic of an older generation?
That is a great point.
Will the evolving labor market simply force organizations to adopt radical flexibility as a baseline survival requirement, rendering all of these boardroom mandates entirely obsolete in just a few short years?
Wow.
It is entirely possible that the companies fighting so viciously to fill their office buildings today are fighting a war that history has already decided.
That is a fascinating and incredibly provocative thought to end on. It brings us right back to that opening idea of the psychological contract. The ink on the employment agreement isn't just invisible anymore. It's in the process of being entirely rewritten by a new generation with completely different expectations of autonomy and trust.
Absolutely.
We want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Our goal is always to take these complex, dense sources and unpack them so you have the actionable insights you need to understand the rapidly changing world around you. Keep questioning the status quo in your own workplace, keep pushing for that transparency and procedural justice, and we will catch you on the next one. Take care.